Unlocking Emotional Intelligence, a journey towards self understanding. Introduction. Oh, hey there. Welcome to our mental wellness journey. I want to invite you to take a seat, grab a warm cup of tea, and settle in as we dive deep into the beautiful, yet often perplexing world of emotions. If you're like me, you might find that emotions can feel overwhelming and baffling at times. But today, we're going to discover not just what our emotions are, but how they serve us and how we can learn to navigate them more skillfully. Together, we'll explore 5 powerful keys to understanding our emotions that can unlock a richer, more fulfilling life. Key 1: emotions are information, not judgments. Emotions as GPS, navigating life through feelings, the awakening. I remember the day everything changed. I was sitting at my cluttered desk, papers strewn everywhere, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. It was one of those days when the weight of unexamined emotions felt like an iron shackle on my chest. After braving yet another fruitless meeting, I felt the familiar tingle of frustration creeping in. In my mind, it echoed louder than the clamor of my colleagues. "You should be better at this. What's wrong with you?" But that old tired mantra was very friend to me. I'd carried it long enough to confuse it for part of my identity. But today, something was different. I had stumbled upon a profound realization, an insight that felt like the twist of a key unlocking a door to an entirely new perspective on my feelings. Emotions, I learned, are not judgments about my character. They are merely information. The concept of emotions as information, this notion required some time to settle in. At first, I was skeptical. How could pain, resentment, or sadness be anything but a reflection of my worth? But as I began to explore this idea, I noticed how it shifted my understanding. It dawned on me that emotions are akin to a GPS system. Rather than holding a mirror up to my flaws, they directed me toward truths I often overlooked. When frustration bubbled up at work, rather than feeling trapped in a cycle of self-loathing, I started asking myself why I was frustrated. Was it the chaotic environment? Was it the feeling of being undervalued? In this questioning, I was peeling back layers of my experience, searching for the core issues that remained unaddressed.
Frustration and boundaries.
Let's examine that frustration I felt at work in greater detail. I had worked diligently to cultivate a strong work ethic, yet, in moments of discontent, I felt as though I was spiraling into self-doubt. Each wave of frustration made me question my dedication, skills, and even my motives. However, with my newfound perspective, I viewed this frustration not as a personal failure, but as a signal. It was a clear indication that my boundaries were being crossed. Work was demanding more of me than I was willing to give. I was gravitating toward burnout territory, and my emotions were signaling that it was time to realign my values and boundaries. Once I recognized this, I sought to communicate my feelings openly with my employer. The conversation was uncomfortable and raw, but it was liberating. I left that meeting feeling empowered. My frustration had not only pointed me in the right direction, but it also sparked a constructive dialogue that led to a healthier working environment. The spectrum of emotions. Understanding that emotions provide valuable information profoundly changed how I interacted with a full spectrum of feelings. Happiness, sadness, anger, and even fear became messengers rather than adversaries. Sadness, for instance, was no longer something to dread. Instead of suppressing it, I learned to embrace it as a catalyst for reflection. There were moments when life would throw curveballs at me, a friend's betrayal, a lost opportunity, or an unexpected farewell. In the past, my instinct was to squash sadness, to tough it out. But when I accepted it as just another piece of information, I found the courage to explore what it meant. What was I grieving for? What was the lesson hidden beneath the heartache? Anger is a protective force. The same transformation occurred with anger. For years, society admonished us to suppress anger, labeling it as rude or inappropriate. But in this process of self discovery, I shifted my perspective. Anger became a protective force. It informed me when there were violations against my values or when I felt powerless.
Once, during a family gathering, I was met with a barrage of opinions about my life choices. My instinct was to retreat, to bottle up my feelings, but I chose a different route. I recognized the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Rather than hiding from it, I confronted it. I voiced my discomfort. I realized that assertiveness was not only within my abilities, it was necessary. The journey continues.
Adopting this new view of emotions wasn't an overnight transformation. It required consistent practice and patience. As I learned to differentiate emotions from judgments, I faced some challenging truths about myself, acknowledging fears, recognizing patterns, taking ownership of my choices.
But in that journey, what emerged was a deeper sense of authenticity. I was no longer bound to a narrative that dictated I should always be happy or avoid discomfort. Instead, I embraced the full range of human experience. It became liberating to acknowledge my emotions openly, to see them as guides on my path rather than hindrances.
Your emotions are your allies. As I pen this chapter, I urge you to consider your own relationship with emotions. What are they telling you? How can you reinterpret them? Your feelings are not your downfall, they are your allies. Rather than putting up walls against your inner landscape, open the gateway and listen. I transformed my life when I learned to see emotions as the dynamic, informative friends they are, providing invaluable guidance on this ever unfolding journey called life. Embrace your GPS. It will indeed lead you home. Key 2, the brain's emotional highway. As I sit down to pen my thoughts, it strikes me how the hastiest reactions often overshadow our more rational impulses. Much like a car racing down a highway with too few stops. Growing up, emotions often felt akin to a foggy morning that obstructed clear vision. As I've navigated the labyrinth of adult life, I've come to learn a critical truth. Our brains are not just complicated organs, but intricate highways of emotion, where switches and exits are controlled by the emotions that course through them. Allow me to share a moment that crystallized this understanding for me. It was a rainy Tuesday morning, one fraught with anxiety. I had volunteered to give a speech at a local community event, a chance to share my passion for mental health awareness. The moment I walked onto the stage, however, the fog enveloped me anew. My heart raced. I could hear its echo amplifying as if conducting an orchestra of tension. What I hadn't realized at that pivotal moment was that my amygdala was already in motion, racing ahead to process the emotional stimuli of that stage. It was a genuine reminder of how fast the emotional highway operates compared to our logical pathways. The amygdala serves as the emotional alarm system of our brain. It's like the siren of a fire truck, sounding the alarm before the whole picture is even gathered. In those seconds before logic could take a seat at the table, my body was inundated with cortisol, that notorious stress hormone, putting me on high alert. The brain's emotional highway had kicked into overdrive, accelerating my heart rate and flooding my senses. The urge to flee or fight instantly overtook the calmer, more rational responses that I had rehearsed countless times prior. In that moment, though my amygdala buzzed with alarm, I took a breath. I remembered that there lies a powerful tool in mindfulness, a pause. Instead of surrendering to the typical pattern of impulsive reactions that stemmed from fear, I seized the moment to act with intention. I looked into the audience, real people with real stories, each face exposing a glimmer of empathy and support. In using my breath as a bridge between my mind and body, the fog slowly began to clear, and the highway became smooth once more. Understanding that this drama unfolded in milliseconds could have easily empowered me to make better decisions in that moment. And today, I want to share how you can harness your own emotional highway. The importance of awareness. First, awareness acts as a critical checkpoint on our emotional highways. Often, we drive through life without realizing that we can take the wheel back from our amygdala. When we recognize the signs of heightened emotions, where our hearts race, palms sweat, or our thoughts spiral, we can take back some control. Begin using mindfulness techniques to act as your road signs. Take note of your emotional responses, as they hold clues about your current circumstances. The next time you feel your heart rate soar like mine did, remember that flight or flight response is natural. Acknowledge it. Recognize that something in your environment is triggering your amygdala. Instead of allowing it to commandeer your brain's operations, take a moment, breathe deeply, grounding yourself in the present. The power of pause. This pause allows for a transition from emotional reaction to thoughtful response. In my speech, I employed this simple yet powerful technique. Each deep inhale provided me a momentary anchor, slowing the whirling thoughts and fears that clouded my mind. Making decisions in the face of overwhelming emotions is simply not sustainable. By embracing this pause, we give our logical mind the opportunity to catch up, make sense of the situation, and guide us towards appropriate responses. Studies in neuroscience affirm how this conscious pause allows our prefrontal cortex, responsible for reason and decision-making, to engage, providing a much-needed checkpoint before we proceed down the emotional highway. Rewiring your highways. In the long run, the brain can rewire itself. It's called neuroplasticity. We can sculpt our highways into well-marked routes over time. Every time we choose to pause instead of react, we reinforce connections in the brain that favor thoughtful responses. Practicing mindfulness daily through meditation, journaling, or even quiet reflection can contribute to this rewiring. Each moment of awareness brings about a subtle change, an enhancement to the neural circuits that govern our reactions. Seeking support. I learned an invaluable lesson through this journey, a lesson that has persisted beyond that initial moment of anxiety. It's vital to seek support. Our emotional highways don't have to become lonely paths. Share your feelings, talk to someone about your triggers, and explore the moments when your amygdala runs rampant. Leaning on others creates openings for growth, understanding, and acceptance. As we listen, share, and engage, we dissolve some of that fog, clearing the way for a richer, fuller experience of our emotional landscape. We don't have to ride the emotional highway alone. There are fellow travelers too. Conclusion. In traversing our emotional highways, we hold the keys. From understanding the swift reactions of our brain's amygdala to embracing the life-changing pause, we learn to be proactive rather than reactive. Before you step onto your metaphorical stage, whether it's a presentation, conversation, or challenge, remember to take that moment. The next time your heart starts to race, take a breath and consciously command your thoughts. Keep in mind, you're not merely a passenger on this emotional highway, but rather the driver. You have the power to choose your path and direct your journey. With every mindful action, every moment of pause, you steer your emotional highway toward clarity, purpose, and connection. That's where the real magic happens. Key 3, emotional awareness practice. Embrace the waves, a journey through emotional awareness. It's a crisp morning in October, the kind that heralds change in the air. As I sit by the window with my coffee, I can see leaves changing colors. Their fiery transformation reflects an evolution I've experienced in my own life. This journey, all filled with emotional turbulence, taught me the value of becoming emotionally aware. Today, I want to share with you my method, the EAC technique, which has fundamentally reshaped how I navigate life's emotional waves. Explore. The first step of my emotional awareness practice, Explore, is deceptively simple yet profoundly powerful. I don't know about you, but I tend to be swept away by emotions, often feeling as if I'm drowning in their depths. It was only when I began to pause and name my emotions that I discovered an incredible tool for self-reflection. One chilly evening in January, I had an argument with a close friend. Instead of diving into a rabbit hole of resentment, I consciously paused. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and asked myself, what am I feeling? A few moments passed before I whispered, I feel hurt. Just that act of naming the emotion created a shift within me. By acknowledging my hurt, I allowed myself to step outside the chaotic swirl of feelings and observe them from a distance. This practice of exploration paved the way for deeper understanding. Through moments like the one I had that evening, I learned that emotions, like the weather, can shift in an instant. Recognizing them is the first step toward navigating them. Autolize. Once I've tagged an emotion, I move to the second step, analyze. In this phase, I ask myself, what triggered this feeling? Often, this exploration revealed patterns I had been blind to. Take that same argument with my friend. It wasn't merely the disagreement itself that hurt, it was a previous experience where I felt invalidated during a similar conversation. Recognizing that link was eye-opening. It illuminated how past instances of emotional neglect influenced my current feelings. In setting out to analyze, I learned to trace these connections. When I recognized the roots of my emotions, I didn't merely react to the surface. I saw a wider context. This deeper understanding allowed me to respond more thoughtfully in future interactions, empowering me to break cycles of reactive behavior. Support? Support is the final step in my EESA technique, but not the least significant. Responding to myself with compassion took practice, but it became a balm for my bruised spirit. After that argument, I spent time reflecting on my feelings and triggers. I wrote in my emotion journal, which has become a loyal companion on this journey. Instead of chastising myself for feeling hurt, I wrote, "It's okay to feel this way. Your emotions are valid." Over time, this inner dialogue evolved from one of criticism to one of understanding. This compassionate conversation with myself became vital. I learned that supporting myself wasn't about avoiding difficult emotions. It was about embracing them with kindness. When I felt overwhelmed, I reminded myself of all I had endured and overcome. I started thanking my emotions for providing insight into my experiences. The emotion journal. You may wonder, how could such a simple act as journaling shape my emotional landscape? Keeping an emotion journal transformed abstract feelings into tangible experiences. Every day, I made it a ritual to write down the emotions I encountered, the triggers behind them, and the responses I chose. Sometimes I'd find a multitude of emotions crowded into a single entry, a real testament to the complexities of being human. Other times, I'd notice that certain triggers appeared repeatedly, signaling areas of my life that needed attention or healing. The emotion journal became my guide, mapping my emotional journey. It's where I poured out everything: joy, sadness, fear, and gratitude. Each entry was not an insurmountable wall, but rather a stepping stone, leading me to a better version of myself. Conclusion. Emotional awareness is not merely an exercise. It's a revolutionary practice that can change how we interact with ourselves and others. By implementing the EAC technique, explore, analyze, support, I navigated my emotional landscape with greater assurance and understanding. Now, as I look out at the colorful leaves fluttering in the wind, I am reminded that emotions are as cyclical as the seasons. They come, they go, and sometimes they transform into something beautiful. I invite you to take this journey alongside me. It's time to face our emotions head on, one wave at a time, with the compassion and understanding we all deserve. Embrace the waves, for within them lies the very essence of who we are. Key 4, emotional regulation strategies to unlock emotional freedom, navigating life with intention. There is an unsettling truth in our emotions that most of us grapple with on a daily basis. Feelings can be overwhelming. They wash over us like tides, leaving us stranded on the shores of anxiety or despair if we lack a raft to navigate the tumultuous waters of life. I was once a prisoner in my own emotional landscape, reacting on impulse, swinging wildly between moments of joy and spirals of sadness. However, I've gradually learned that feeling an emotion doesn't mean I have to be a slave to it. Today, I want to share my journey and the strategies that have empowered me to regulate my emotions, transforming my life into one of intentional responses rather than expected reactions. The awakening, recognizing my emotional turmoil. It wasn't until a particularly chaotic period in my life that I began to realize the power I had within me to regulate my emotions. Work stress and personal relationships combined into a storm of anxiety and frustration. I found myself lashing out at loved ones, feeling the weight of regret immediately after. I knew I had to change. It was during this crossroads that I discovered the importance of emotional regulation. Strategy 1: Box breathing. The first tool I stumbled upon was box breathing. This rhythmic pattern of inhaling, holding, exhaling, and holding again offered me a way to ground myself in the present moment. Picture this. I'm sitting at my office desk, the walls closing in as the deadline looms. My heart races, thoughts swirl, and panic creeps in. Taking a moment to pause, I gently close my eyes and inhale for 4 seconds, feeling my lungs fill with air, hold for another 4, and then release, picturing the tension dissolving into the atmosphere. It's like pressing a reset button in the chaos of my mind. With practice, I notice that this technique does more than just bring a momentary sense of calm. It allows me to step back from the precipice of emotional reaction and decide how I want to engage with my feelings intentionally. Harnessing the stillness after a cycle of box breathing feels like reclaiming lost territory. Strategy 2: the body scan. Next, I integrated the body scan into my emotional toolkit. Closing my eyes, I envisioned my body from head to toe, taking note of any tightness or discomfort. I learned to listen to my body's whispers before they turned into shouts. Is my jaw tight from stress? Are my shoulders up by my ears, signaling tension? Instead of ignoring these signs, I invited mindfulness into the mix, consciously relaxing each muscle group as I made my way through the scan. One evening, overwhelmed by feelings of inadequacy after a challenging day, I decided to practice the body scan. Laying on the floor beneath the soft glow of a lamp, I began from my toes, slowly working my way up. With each exhalation, I envisioned letting go of harmful thoughts lurking in my joints. As I reached my heart, I felt an undeniable sense of release, an acknowledgement of the burdens I had been carrying. The body scan allowed me to foster a connection between my emotional and physical states, revealing that I didn't have to be at the mercy of my feelings. Strategy 3: cognitive reframing. As my journey deepened, I discovered cognitive reframing, an emotional alchemy that brought clarity to my struggles. This practice consists of reshaping the narrative around my experiences. Instead of seeing a difficult conversation with a colleague as a personal failure, I began to view it as a learning opportunity, an invitation for growth. One day, I entered a meeting bracing myself for criticism. The weight of anxiety had been a familiar companion. Yet, when the feedback from my manager arrived, it was constructive rather than punitive. In that moment, I chose to reframe. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, I recognized it as a chance to improve. That simple shift in perspective freed me from the emotional chains of negative self-talk, illuminating previously hidden pathways to professional and personal development. The transformation, responding with intention. With these strategies in my arsenal, life began to shift. I found myself engaging with my emotions differently. I became aware of patterns, when stress boiled over or when joy bubbled to the surface. I learned to pause, breathe, and reflect rather than react, often whispering to myself, "What do I want to create in this moment?" This question became a guiding light, allowing me to respond with intention. In moments of anger, I would practice box breathing, reminding myself that I have the power to choose my next words. When sadness weighed heavily, the body scan helped me untangle what I felt in my body and understand the root cause of my distress. Through cognitive reframing, I began to see challenges as invitations to grow rather than barriers to my success. The journey continues. My emotional regulation journey is not one of linear progress. It is a winding path filled with ups and downs. Some days I forget the tools that have served me well and I slip back into old habits. But I no longer carry guilt or shame for these moments. Each stumble is a teacher, a reminder that the journey is ongoing. As I reflect on this transformation, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for the emotional tools I have cultivated. They are more than techniques, they are lifelines that tether me to a more balanced existence. By consciously engaging with my emotions instead of resisting them, I have unlocked the door to emotional freedom. A sanctuary where I can navigate life's complexities with grace and resilience. If you find yourself amidst emotional chaos, I invite you to explore these strategies. Create your own emotional toolkit. And remember, feelings may rise without warning, but you hold the power to guide your ship through the storm. Embrace that power, and you may find that emotional regulation can lead to a life filled not only with authenticity, but with exceptional peace. Key 5: emotions are universal, expressions are personal. The power within, mastering emotional regulation. A journey begins. I still remember the day I realized that my emotions had taken me hostage. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon, and I was stuck in rush hour traffic, barely making a dent in my plans for the day. With each honk of the horn from drivers fighting their own battles, my heart rate climbed and my pulse quickened. The frustration bubbled up inside me like a boiling pot on the verge of overflowing. I could feel my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing with negative thoughts, and a wave of anxiety crashing over me. That day I had an epiphany. My emotions were controlling me, not the other way around. As I took a deep breath and let it out, I realized that I didn't have to remain a victim of my feelings. That moment set me on a transformative journey armed with strategies that would empower me to navigate the tumultuous waters of my emotional landscape. I'm the Maya anchored box breathing. Box breathing became my first lifeline amidst the chaos. I discovered this simple technique through a mindfulness workshop I decided to attend after that turbulent Tuesday. When the facilitator first introduced it, I thought it was too easy to be effective. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, she instructed. And I hesitated, skepticism creeping in. But it wasn't long before I became a devoted practitioner. During one particularly stressful week at work, filled with looming deadlines and endless emails, I found myself retreating to the quiet of my office during lunch breaks. I closed my eyes, placed my hands on my knees, and began the rhythmic cycle of box breathing. Inhaling deeply through my nose for 4 seconds, I felt my chest expand, my body flooding with air and calm. Holding that breath for another count of 4, I turned inward, giving my racing thoughts the space to settle. And I finally exhaled over 4 seconds, a wave of release washed over me. The world outside transformed, the noise faded, replaced by a serene focus that I desperately needed. Box breathing became my anchor, a cherished tool that grounded me and catapulted me from stress to a state of clarity. As I navigated challenging moments, I found it to be an effortless balm for my racing mind and overwhelming emotions. The body scan. Soon after, I expanded my toolbox with a technique known as the body scan. It felt akin to a mini vacation for the mind, a meditative journey through my physical self. The first time I tried it, I was incredulous at how effective it was at helping me identify and release tension. Lying in my bedroom, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Starting from my toes, I began my mental check-in, moving slowly up my body. Are my toes relaxed? Yes. My feet? Comfortable. I continued paying attention to each body part, acknowledging any areas where I felt tightness or discomfort. When I arrived at my shoulders, I was surprised by how much tension I had been holding. I took an extra pause there, picturing the stress melting away with every inhale and exhale. This simple practice allowed me to connect my emotional experiences to their physical manifestations, helping me understand how deeply intertwined our bodies and hearts truly are. From that day forward, the body scan became a part of my evening routine. I learned to recognize when my emotions began to run high, prompting me to pause and deliberately check in with myself. It became my self care ritual, a way of honoring my physical existence while releasing the entanglements of emotional turmoil. The art of cognitive reframing. Emotional regulation wouldn't be complete without addressing the power of perception. The day I learned about cognitive reframing was a day of profound transformation. I attended a workshop that delved into the mechanics of thought. I always had the impression that emotional responses were reflexive, beyond my control, but that day I discovered a different path. The facilitator encouraged us to take an emotionally charged thought, something that caused us distress, and view it through a different lens. This was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. I took a moment to reflect on a recent disappointment at work. I had been passed over for a promotion that I desperately wanted, and my initial reaction had been steeped in feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. But as I began reframing this situation in the workshop, I asked myself different questions. Instead of feeling defeated, could I view this rejection as a stepping stone to explore new opportunities? Could I pursue personal growth, seeking training that would prepare me for future chances? I realized this was a chance to improve my skills and showcase my determination. This shift in perspective was liberating. I was no longer a passive participant in my emotional narrative, but an active author, shaping my interactions with the world and myself. Living intentionally. These strategies, box breathing, body scanning, and cognitive reframing, became the pillars of my emotional regulation toolkit. They empowered me to respond to my emotions with intention rather than impulsivity. I discovered that feeling an emotion didn't mean I had to be enslaved by it. Instead, I could ride the waves, knowing they would eventually settle. With my newfound tools, I learned to navigate life's ups and downs with grace. I was able to cultivate a peaceful inner environment, a sanctuary where I could discover that the power to transform my emotional experience was always within my reach. As I continue along my journey, this realization becomes clearer with each passing day. Today, my emotions serve as my guides, leading me toward a more resilient self. And when I feel the stirrings of anxiety or frustration, I no longer buckle under their weight. Instead, I take a deep breath, returning to the practices that have become lifelines in my life. I invite you to explore these strategies and find what resonates with you. Freedom lies in understanding that emotions, although strong, do not dictate our reality. We hold the key to our inner peace, the emotional intelligence cycle, navigating life with awareness and empathy. Every morning I wake up and face the mirror, a routine that feels deceptively mundane. But each reflection is an opportunity for exploration. Who is this person? What emotions am I carrying with me today? The journey of understanding myself began with one crucial element: self-awareness. It all started when I realized that recognizing my own emotions was essential in navigating life's complexities. This realization unfolded into what I now refer to as the emotional intelligence cycle, a continuous loop that has become a compass in my personal and professional life. Self-awareness, the first step. Self-awareness might seem like a simple concept, yet it is one of the most profound. It is the cornerstone of emotional intelligence, the seed from which everything else grows. In my early 30s, I remember sitting in a dimly lit cafe, feeling a mixture of anxiety and restlessness. I had just transitioned to a new job, one that pushed me out of my comfort zone. It was during one of those quiet moments with a cup of coffee in hand that I began to consciously pay attention to my emotions. Why did the thought of new responsibilities make my stomach churn? Why did I feel an urge to call my best friend after every challenging interaction? I made a pact with myself to explore these feelings, to ask questions and to journal about them. The more I wrote, the clearer my emotional landscape became. I found that understanding myself was the first step in relating to the world around me. Self-regulation. The power of control. Once I began to identify my emotions, the next hurdle was self-regulation, a skill I initially struggled with. It's one thing to feel, but entirely another to manage those feelings effectively. I had a tendency to react impulsively, especially under stress. I remember a confrontation with a colleague spiraling out of control because I took offense too personally and responded with defensiveness rather than calmness. Learning to pause before reacting was a game changer. I started practicing mindfulness techniques such as deep breathing and visualization. In moments of stress, I would breathe deeply, let the air fill my lungs, and envision releasing negativity. Over time, I became more adept at responding to situations objectively rather than reacting emotionally. This self regulation gave me power over my emotions, enabling me to navigate difficult situations with grace. Motivation, emotions as fuel. Self awareness and self regulation laid the groundwork for the next crucial step: motivation. I learned that emotions could serve as powerful motivators for achieving my goals. Once I understood my emotions better, recognizing what inspired me and what discouraged me, I realized I could channel that energy into productive endeavors. One particular instance stands out vividly. I had a dream of writing a book, but self doubt often held me back. It was my emotions, my fear of failure, and my excitement for storytelling that I began to harness. Instead of allowing fear to paralyze me, I used it as a motivating force. Each time the anxiety bubbled to the surface, I promised myself I would write that day, if only for a few minutes. Eventually, those small moments turned into chapters, and what started as fear transformed into passion and drive. Empathy, understanding others. With motivation came a profound shift in how I view the emotions of others. Empathy emerged as an essential skill in my emotional intelligence toolkit. Understanding the feelings of others wasn't merely a soft skill, it became a necessary element in fostering deeper connections and collaboration. In my workplace, I began to notice how many of my colleagues were burdened by their own unseen struggles. By being perceptive to their emotional states, the stress in their voices, the hesitancy in their body language, I initiated conversations not just about work, but about well being. I listened, offering my support and understanding. Over time, I became a go to confidant for many, and in turn, I developed stronger relationships that fostered a more positive work environment. Social skills, building connections. Finally, the last piece of the puzzle was social skills. With self awareness, self regulation, motivation, and empathy in place, I found that my interactions transformed. Conversations became more meaningful, and relationships flourished. Practicing active listening became a cornerstone of my social interactions. Instead of thinking about what I would say next while someone else spoke, I learned to be present. I asked more questions, displayed genuine curiosity, and validated the feelings of others. This approach dismantled barriers and built bridges. I began to facilitate healthier discussions, resolve conflicts amicably, and encourage teamwork. The cycle continues. The emotional intelligence cycle is, in essence, a never ending journey of growth. Self awareness feeds self regulation, which spurs motivation, enhances empathy, and strengthens social skills. Each element feeds back into the others, creating a dynamic framework for not only personal enrichment, but also fostering strong, supportive relationships with those around us. Reflecting on this cycle, I've come to appreciate that emotional intelligence is not merely about handling my own emotions, but about enhancing the emotional climate of my life and relationships. As I continue to navigate the complexities of adulthood, from career challenges to familial dynamics, I carry the emotional intelligence cycle as my steadfast guide. Each emotion I acknowledge, each response I regulate, each motivation I harness, each empathetic connection I build brings me closer to a fulfilling and resilient life. In a world that often feels divided, embracing this cycle could very well be the key to not only understanding ourselves, but also embracing our shared humanity. Practical homework, a journey through emotions. The awakening. I remember the day it all began vividly. The afternoon sun filtered through the swaying trees outside my window, casting gentle patterns of light and shadow on my desk. I had been scrolling through social media only to stumble upon an article about emotional awareness. The headline: Mastering Your Emotions, a Practical Guide, sparked in me a craving for understanding, a thirst to uncover the layers of my emotional self that had for too long remained shrouded beneath the surface. Initially, I thought I'd just read the article and move on, but something compelled me to dig deeper. I clicked on the link to an accompanying lecture where the speaker invited listeners to embark on a week-long journey of self-discovery, urging us to examine our emotions, to identify, analyze, and regulate them. For skeptics such as myself, it seemed a daunting challenge, but an underlying sense of urgency whispered to me, perhaps this was exactly what I needed. The challenge. And so, in the following days, I committed myself to the task at hand. The first homework assignment called for me to identify one emotion each day. Simple enough, I thought. I decided to start on a Monday, a fresh slate. As I went about my day, engaged in work meetings, grocery shopping, and the usual daily hustle, I had an unusual realization. Emotions were everywhere. The first emotion that I identified was anxiety. It had bubbled to the surface during a conference call when I realized I was the only one not contributing to the discussion. I felt a tightness in my chest, a tremor of self-doubt creeping in. After jotting it down in my journal, I paused to ponder its origin. What had triggered this anxiety? Was it the pressure of expectations, or perhaps an innate fear of inadequacy? Whatever the reason, identifying the emotion itself opened a door I had long kept shut. The following days saw a series of emotional revelations: sadness on Tuesday when I opened an old photo album, anger on Wednesday during a misunderstanding with a friend, and joy on Thursday as I savored a quiet morning with my coffee. The triggers. As I recorded my emotions, I also began exploring their triggers. I created a simple table in my journal listing the identified emotion alongside possible triggers. Under anxiety, I wrote down public speaking, fear of being judged, and expectations. Under sadness, I noted down nostalgia, loss, and isolation. The triggers began to form a psychological map of sorts, revealing patterns I never recognized before. One particularly noteworthy evening, I took a moment to revisit my table. As I did, a profound truth settled within me. I was not my emotions. I could observe them, understand them, and, with practice, learn to respond to them thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. This realization was liberating. The regulation technique. The following task was to practice an emotional regulation technique. Armed with the knowledge I had gained, I turned to breathing exercises to help ground myself when emotions felt overwhelming. One afternoon, when a wave of frustration washed over me due to a minor setback at work, I paused. I closed my office door, inhaled deeply, and exhaled slowly. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. I welcomed the emotion, acknowledging it without judgment. As I breathed in, I imagined filling my lungs with clarity. As I breathed out, I visualized releasing the tension built up inside me. It was an experiment, an emotional regulation technique in action, and astonishingly, I felt the frustration slip away, replaced by a soothing calmness. Mean gentle with myself. As the week progressed, I faced moments of struggle and setbacks. Occasionally, I would forget to identify my emotions or simply brush them aside. On one such occasion, I grew frustrated with myself for not being consistent in my efforts. But then a thought emerged. This process was not about perfection. I reminded myself of the final part of my homework, to be gentle with myself throughout this journey. Emotions are intricate and layered, much like an onion. Peeling back each layer requires patience and kindness. Instead of chastising myself for imperfections, I learned to be forgiving, to speak to myself with compassion as I would to a dear friend. It's a transformation. By the end of the week, I had undergone a subtle transformation. I was no longer merely a passive passenger of my emotions. I had stepped into the driver's seat, navigating through ups and downs with newfound clarity. Every emotion, once a seemingly chaotic storm, was now a chapter in my life's narrative, worthy of observation and understanding. I found that the deeper I delved into this practice, the more competent I felt in responding to my emotional landscape. I became attentive to my triggers, nurturing myself with the techniques I learned, and approaching my emotions with the gentleness that deepened my self-acceptance. Moving forward, This journey did not come to a definitive end. While my week of homework had wrapped up, the real work had just begun. Each day presented an opportunity to practice emotional awareness, to remain curious about my feelings, and to cherish the skills I'd honed. In this ongoing exploration, my challenge to you, dear reader, is to join me in cultivating your emotional intelligence. Like I did, take a deep breath and embark on your own emotional discovery. Identify your emotions, unpack your triggers, and practice emotional regulation techniques while being gentle with yourself. Together, we can embrace the beautifully chaotic journey of being human, one emotion at a time. Remember, understanding your emotions is not simply a task to be completed, it's a journey of self discovery. Each step you take, no matter how small, leads you to greater self understanding and emotional freedom. So, as you embark on this journey, know that it's perfectly okay to feel what you feel. If this exploration has resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who could benefit from it. Together, let's create a community filled with compassion, understanding, and emotional wellness. Until next time, take care of your beautifully complex emotional self.